have to start with the fiscal guardrail set up by this government. Christopher Freeland essentially saying they are meeting their target of a $40 billion deficit, staying well below the 2% deficit to GDP number. Is that responsible enough fiscally for this government?
Well, I think, when you look at international comparisons, Canada always compares well relative to other nations. And, if we're back at one point below 1% of GDP, you look at a country like the U.S., we're talking 7% of GDP, that's good news. Now, the question is whether this budget really, we can rely on this budget to achieve that. And there are still many question marks. We see a lot of spending, but it relies on strong economic growth, and it also relies on taxation, which is not clear whether it will deliver the kind of revenues that are expected.
Well, let's talk about that because, as you say, this does rely on economic growth. The federal government pointing to what they see as an improving picture when it comes to the GDP of this country. Also, the introduction of a new capital gains tax, sin taxes in vaping and cigarettes. How solid are those numbers? You referenced it a little bit there in your first answer, but dig into that. Just how solid are those projections?
Well, on economic growth, it's important to remind everyone that they use the average of the private sector forecast. Now, these forecasts were collected before the government announced a reduction in non-permanent resident admissions. Now, in our calculation, since that announcement, we've downgraded our GDP forecast for 2025 and 2026 by around 0.7 percentage points per year. So that doesn't get accounted in those numbers. So that's already a first risk. We also know that there are risks to the inflation picture. We just had a surprise in the U.S. and now everybody's cutting their rate reduction forecast in the U.S. Whether that happens in Canada, so far we're not there, but it's also a risk as well. And a lot of that hinges really on those interest rate cuts. So that's one thing to be that I would still be very prudent about, very skeptical about. And the other thing is capital gains taxation. We know that it focuses on the wealthy individuals, on the wealthy corporations, but those incomes and that wealth is very mobile. So and that's why historically it's been very difficult to implement. Those ideas are not new, but they're always difficult to implement, and the results tend to be disappointing just because of how volatile those and how sophisticated as well those constituents can be in terms of optimizing their taxes.
Very mobile, as you say. And that does raise another question for me, because this country has long had a productivity issue. And if you are creating new capital gains taxes, as applies to wealthy individuals as well as to corporations, does that in any way increase the challenge of productivity building in this country?
Well, I think the way they designed it recognized that. So they focus on the wealthier corporations and individuals, and whereas there's a threshold at $250,000 in terms of capital gains, and they actually reduced the inclusion rate for entrepreneurs. So they don't want to penalize startups and entrepreneurs. They recognize that this kind of measure could go against the intention. Now, the question is going to be really about the message, about what people take out coming out of this budget. And I'm pretty sure that there's going to be a lot of criticism that we're just increasing taxes on where we need it, which is on investment, which is on businesses and wealth creation. That's likely to leave a sour taste in the mouth of many people.
And also the question of cuts, because if you create an even very simplistic scenario, if a household budget is struggling, cuts is the first thing a family will make. Is this government abrogating that responsibility to actually make the tough decision to make cuts?
Well, in the last budget, they said they would identify $15 billion worth of measures of savings measures, so making cuts or optimizing spending. And just a month ago, we learned that only $9 billion had been identified, and that was before just a raft of spending announcements that have been made. So this is not a government that has been known to be very disciplined and be able to execute execute on cuts, spending cuts. They've been known for rather the opposite. So yes, it does send a message that might be worrying in terms of the management of the public purse. Now, on paper, at least, they respect those fiscal anchors. I think this is important. This is going to be important for ratings agencies. There are also urgencies, valid reasons to spend, but it's still a budget where we see a lot being scattered. We would have preferred, more of a focus on boosting wealth and investments and productivity.
It's interesting because in the budget itself, the federal government references this idea of creating an environment of certainty for business so that they know they can invest in this country. Have they succeeded in creating an environment of certainty?
I'm not sure we can say that this is the case. I think, when you look at, for example, just the investment tax credit, now I salute the fact that we know a little bit more on some of those tax credits, for example, in the electric vehicle sector, but there are still many of those that remain to be announced, that remain to go through Parliament, and those have been announced, a year from now, if not even longer. And businesses are still waiting. They don't have that certainty. They can't bank those investment tax credits so long as they don't have those details. And given all the uncertainty related to geopolitics, oil prices, interest rates, I can't say that a government that comes out with tax increases, no matter how designed, is going to offer that additional certainty that many businesses are hoping for.
I know your time is precious, but I do have one more question for you, and it's a bit more of a broad question. This government does not again lay out, or fails once again to lay out a path towards a balanced budget. Is that concerning?
I think I'm in the camp that thinks that you have to look at the deficit, as a share of GDP. Even you look at, for example, during the Harper Conservatives, they inherited from a balanced budget. Then came the great financial crisis. They, strive to bring it back to balance. They didn't quite succeed. That just illustrates how difficult things are in today's world, where you have emergencies left and right, being on climate, population aging, immigration, and also the construction of new homes. So it's going to be difficult in that context. But if we can keep it in a reasonable amount, internationally speaking, as a share of GDP, I think that's fine. And that approach that this government has taken since it's been in power, we haven't lost the AAA, so it demonstrates that you don't lose that confidence by being credible on that front. But the key here is remaining credible and not relying so much on hypotheses that could go wrong.
Jean, thank you for the time.
Thank you, a pleasure.